Brian, thanks for coming on the show. I want to open up with this idea, and it is why the hype around nuclear. It feels like nuclear's, I don't know if it's getting sexy again or it's getting sexy, but the whole world, one way or the other, nobody's neutral on this idea of nuclear power. Why is this happening?
Yeah, well, hey, great to be here talking with you. And that's a great opener. What a good question. And it's funny, I'll offer a question that I'm sometimes asked when I travel around and speak on nuclear issues. One of the things I'm often asked is, well, Brian, when is nuclear going to be real? There's all this excitement. When are we going to see nuclear reactors? I chuckle at that because just, to answer your question, let me step back for a moment to set a baseline. In the United States, nuclear energy accounts for almost a fifth of the electrons on the grid. Almost 20% of the power in the U.S. comes from nuclear reactors. We've got 94 operating reactors in this country. That's called about 100 gigawatts of energy. So what I would say, yes, there's a lot of hype around nuclear, and I'd really love to dive into kind of why I think that is, and what we're seeing. But we should all remember nuclear is very real and an incredibly important part of the thing that makes our lights come on when we flip the switch in a lot of parts of this country. The hype comes around, frankly, one of the reasons I love that you and I are having this conversation because of the industry that you come from. The hype really is around the massive needs, those energy demands driven by AI and data centers. That, to me, that's why the hype around nuclear. Go find an article, any given article on nuclear from the last year or so. And I'd almost guarantee that article is paired with some notion of the AI data center industry. It'll be an article about, Google and Kairos Power coming together to form a PPA through which Google will buy power from Kairos reactors that are currently being developed and deployed in Tennessee as part of a partnership with the Department of Energy. You'll find an article about Microsoft engaging with Constellation Power to turn back on one of the 3 Mile Island plants that remains viable to this day and merely shut down for economic reasons. But Microsoft signed a PPA with Constellation, and that's going to reopen that plant under the Crane Clean Energy moniker. There's all these articles out there about nuclear power, but they all have to do with the AI data center industry. And I would tell you, because AI is kind of on everybody's mind today for some reason or another, whether it's users of AI for all these, really whiz bang, cars that can drive themselves and whatnot, or the defense industry and all the things that you can do with AI to hone, the nation's defenses. Other countries are engaged in that as well, which we can talk about some more. AI is everywhere, but you simply don't get AI without energy. And nuclear seems to be and I would submit nuclear is the most exquisite way to meet that energy demand. That's what's driving the hype.
Okay, well, now we're about to test your nerd cred. So this is either going to go really, really well it probably will go really well in some audiences, no matter how you answer. And other audiences are going to be very disappointed in you. When I was a kid, back in the day, there were a couple things we did. So late 70s through early mid 80s, we played D&D and we dressed up. We took bean bags and cardboard swords and we went to the Renaissance Festival.
Yes.
That's what we did. There are no pictures to prove it. I'm just giving verbal assent. I've burned all the data. I'm sure AI could make something that represented me. So I guess my question is, we've had, to your point earlier, nuclear is part of the grid. There's a particular methodology that we follow. There's been a lot of noise, at least in my, I'm in just short of I'm just after the baby boomer generation, whatever that is. And in that gen, a lot of my peers were concerned about nuclear power. The irony is that many of them went to serve in the Navy and other places where they slept next to a nuclear reactor safely for decades.
Yeah.
Why the renaissance of nuclear? And even my kids, I have 3 daughters in their 20s, and they are not offended at all. I didn't have to unwind. I didn't have to confront any misconceptions. It was just a conversation. I've talked about it here on the show before where they're like, oh, 3 Mile Island is getting turned back on for Microsoft. That's cool. They're more irritated with the e-commerce side or whatever than they were the energy. They're like, makes complete sense. Why this renaissance?
Yeah. That has been an interesting dynamic. So just for a moment, I'll know most of my career, I come from a career in the federal government. I bookended that career by retiring from Department of Energy in January. And then I joined the Idaho National Laboratory, which is a Department of Energy owned laboratory and the lead laboratory for nuclear energy research, development, demonstration. And if we go back, so I'm a defense nuclear guy. I came up in the nuclear Navy. I worked in the nuclear weapons complex, the National Nuclear Security Administration. I had oversight of all the defense nuclear activities when I was on the House Appropriations Committee as a professional staff member. And so my mind is often goes back to issues of nuclear weapons and the long history in this country of our nuclear weapons complex. And what you describe as kind of the view of nuclear that you formed as a kid or other folks of those generations had around nuclear. I think it's important to bear in mind that a lot of those views of nuclear were formed during the Cold War, when I think there was I'll call it a real fear, or certainly a concern that suddenly with the ring of a red phone or with the press of a button, there were these forces in the world, primarily between the USSR and in the United States, that suddenly there could be a nuclear holocaust, right? The ballistic missiles start flying across the ocean and the world is destroyed. I don't mean to paint that picture as such a dire thing, but I put yourself back into the 60s, 70s, 80s, where you read textbooks and history books about that time. And there was a lot of concern about kind of that hair trigger that these nuclear weapons set on. Well, when in light of what happened at Chernobyl and then at 3 Mile Island in the 70s and the 80s, amidst the backdrop of kind of the nuclear weapons posture and the Cold War, perhaps it's not surprising that there were skeptical views about nuclear energy, even though kind of the splitting of the atom is pretty much the only thing that weapons and nuclear power plants have in common. Beyond that, the technical aspects of the technology really vary quite dramatically. But you package it all into this idea of nuclear, and nuclear is scary, right? Because nuclear can end the world, right? And so why should I really put my trust in a nuclear power plant if that thing could end the world, right? I'm taking you down a line. It's kind of a layman's view of the way life could have looked during the Cold War. Mm-hmm. And I think for say your kids, my kids today, I've got a freshman in college and a junior in high school. They haven't grown up in the during the Cold War. They weren't exposed to those kind of what one might call those scary issues of nuclear. And I think today we're in this this world where we can talk about nuclear as a viable and again, I use that word, very exquisite form of clean, resilient, reliable baseload energy. Mm. And it's almost, my daughters know that nuclear weapons exist, but they don't conflate that with this thing that has incredible energy density and offers great promise to decarbonize our grid and establish energy security, both in the United States and anywhere where energy poverty exists.
Yeah.
So I think that might be a way to get at your question. It's a great question, and it's an interesting dynamic as I travel around and talk about nuclear to younger audiences.
I am. Thank you for that. At the same time, what's interesting is so that's sort of my direct evidence, and anecdotally, I've heard similar things. Last year, I want to say it was last year, might have even been 2 years ago. I got a chance to go to the Vogtle plant here in Georgia. This is amazing, what we would call traditional nuclear powered site, very big. The actual, the things on the site's a very small area, but the property is huge. It still feels like when I get out of my data center industry bubble, and I know we're going to dive into technology questions and a little bit later, but when I'm just sort of casually moving through the world, there is a thermocline, meaning it feels like, non-scientific, there's still this stalemate of a momentum, and people in their mind think Homer Simpson, and, whether they're coming from it from like that place went bankrupt 4 times before and the fish in that water are going to have 3 eyes, that kind of thing, to scary, could be a weapon event or whatever. And then on the other side of the thermocline, it is, these things are safe. They're green. I don't know that I've heard much of the below the line talk about densification that much, unless they're directly considering it as part of their industry. For example, the data center industry, or reshoring manufacturing, or smelting, or any of these other things. There's a lot of attraction to many energy sources. And so it's, hey, let's revisit this thing. But I just mean, like, in sort of this dividing spot, the people that don't know the industry all that well, I certainly don't, but people that don't know it that well, and they just sort of pick it up as it passes by, there seems to be still, at least in my opinion, a stalemate. Do you think that's true? And if it is, how do we move through the stalemate?
Yeah, that's a great question. First off, I tend to agree with you on the views that exist out there on the nuclear industry, and they are complex views. And one thing I can assure you is that they're all important views, and they are all important to address for the nuclear industry. That's why we, the industry, anybody who makes their living in this industry, has to be ready to go have those conversations at the places where the people exist. Go meet the people in their communities and have conversations about nuclear, but have the right conversation. You don't bring a canned technical presentation all about how safe nuclear energy is, and expect to shove that down their throats and have them be believers in nuclear, and then leave town and feel like you did a good job. Right? That's not the way to have those conversations. You got to get to know the community, understand where the community's concerns may lie, where the community might see opportunities, understand about the communities, and then go engage at the right level. And don't talk at them, but talk with them. Right? And frankly, I think the data center industry is has to manage those same engagement considerations the same way, right? When you're going to build data center campuses around the country.
If we're not careful, and here's why: we're a bunch of introverted engineers. I'm not. If you are, you're the most extroverted introvert I've ever met. But whatever, when we put on our engagement hat, for some people, that's, that's new. They pulled out grandpa's, beaver felt cap, to show up. Here's what we would do in the past. We would just show up and say, hey, here's the economic benefit we're going to bring you and your community. And here's the list. And now just thank you for letting, for us getting to do that for you. And now move out of the way. And that is, if anybody cared at all, because we were going into, look, that used to be the old newspaper building, or an old smelting plant, or, and so there wasn't a lot of concern. But as we've developed out into the larger industrial areas, or converted non-industrial areas into industrial areas, to wade in with that kind of conversation at best is, what am I trying to say? Maybe ignorant. Like, hold on, this communities, as you know, these are complex organisms, and people want to be understood before they want to understand. And they may have no quibble with the economic thing, but that's not their heart of their challenge.
Right.
And so, to your point, I think it's developing in most of us, at least those that are going to be successful, in finding communities that fit with whatever industry that we're trying to bring to them, the ability to listen and then to communicate and remove misinformation and misunderstandings. And if in fact it's not a misunderstanding and it's just an obstacle we can't, well, then we hug it out because we're American citizens, and we just move on to the next place where we can do business together.
Yeah. Now, I think you're spot on, and I want to come back to you used an important word in your question, that was stalemate.
Yeah.
And I want to come back to that because, so as much as I fervently believe in meeting communities, where they are and addressing those concerns and considerations communities have, the stalemate, I think, comes back to the economic discussion. And here we veer away just for a moment, because it does come full circle. But here we veer away from kind of the AI data center focus for advanced nuclear technologies and to the more traditional grid-facing energy plants that have existed in this country for a long time. And for example, go back to those 94 reactors that I mentioned that are currently putting electricity on the grid today. The stalemate traditionally for nuclear, the reason that we hadn't had nuclear construction really going on in this country, and you mentioned Vogtle, those were two success stories. We can talk some more about it if you'd like. Folks would say they were over budget and late. How's that a success? But believe me, there was just for exercising a muscle that in this country we really hadn't been exercising for some time. We learned a ton, and there is a certainty that the next AP1000 deployment in this country will there are a lot of lessons learned from Vogtle that will manifest in the next AP1000 deployment and cause it to happen in a shorter amount of time and for a cheaper cost. But the stalemate in this country really was all around the fact that deploying nuclear technologies, building, say, a large-scale nuclear power plant like what you saw at Vogtle, is an expensive endeavor. There's that high CapEx to get it deployed. Now, once it's operating, the operating costs for nuclear are really quite competitive because at the end of the day, that energy source is so dense, and the cost of uranium is a minor cost of operating the plant. Nuclear is very cost competitive, but it's getting over that hump. And in traditional grid-facing technologies, utilities would look around and say, I don't know that I want to go down the path of deploying a large-scale reactor if I can, and now consider various market conditions or subsidies, say for wind and solar, or there's very inexpensive natural gas. There's all these other reasons why some other energy technologies were less expensive. And hey, look, I don't blame a utility for saying, I'm not going to front the money to get that thing, even though that thing has all of these advantages that nuclear brings, and upwards of an 80+ year operating life. I'm going to chase the thing that is just less expensive. I don't blame the utilities for that. But what I've described is essentially the crux of the stalemate. Nuclear technology saying, but we offer so much more than the other technologies, and the utilities saying, yeah, but I'm not willing to pay that upfront cost to deploy. What's changed, and this is what's kind of exciting about this AI and data center engagement as a very specific off-taker of energy. The AI data center industry has looked at the various energy technologies and said, hey, we do want to decarbonize our operations. We have that as kind of a North Star in our strategy. Wind and solar offer some good opportunities to do that, but we see nuclear as kind of providing all of the opportunities. It is always on. Nuclear happens to have the highest capacity factor of any energy generating asset, 90+% in terms of capacity factor. Always on, it's resilient. Nuclear comes with all of these extra attributes sought after by the AI data center industry. And AI has, in a lot of cases, and we're seeing this certainly with the hyperscalers, it's those deals that I talked about, Google and Microsoft, Meta has made deals, AWS has made nuclear deals. They have deep pockets in huge energy demands. And they're willing to look at kind of a value proposition for nuclear that isn't just based on, say, LCOE. They're looking at nuclear. I'll offer this to you. They're looking at nuclear the same way that in my nuclear Navy upbringing, and for all of my nuclear Navy brethren, and I was part of the Naval Reactors headquarters team in Washington, D.C. I started there on active duty in the Navy as an officer. We view nuclear as something that is more than just let me put it this way. If it were only about LCOE for the nuclear Navy, the levelized cost of electricity, we would build diesel electric submarines. That's what we would deploy. And you, the taxpayer, you might encourage that. You'd say, well, yes, of course, I don't want to spend, X on a submarine. I want to spend Y because that's a lower cost, and let's field diesel electric submarines. The Navy says, no, there are attributes to nuclear that allow us to achieve unmatched undersea dominance. Certainly with our adversaries, we need to maintain that competitive edge when we go to sea and we go under the sea. That's why we invest in nuclear propulsion for our submarines. Similar case is made for our aircraft carriers and what nuclear power offers our aircraft carriers. So we pay those higher costs to design and deploy those reactors. It happens to be that fueling those operations at sea come at a much lower cost than the traditionally fueled ships. But what we gain is that competitive advantage in the blue water. The AI data center industry is starting to view nuclear power the same way. That's why Microsoft was willing to pay more than the prevailing rate of electricity in that area of Pennsylvania to turn back on the 3 Mile Island plant. Constellation said, well, Microsoft, if you sign a PPA under these terms, it will make that plant economically viable again. We'll turn it back on. And Microsoft said, yes, sign me up. So they're viewing it the same way that we do in the nuclear Navy. And that's what's different. And that's what is getting us around that stalemate, because it's not just a conversation between nuclear providers and utilities.
To your point about the PPA, power purchase agreement, that Microsoft had with 3 Mile Island, or at least that was discussed, that 50-year, 100-year, whatever that length of that is, that infinity thing, when you adopt an infinity mindset, not a caught up in the moment mindset, more and more organizations are attracted in trying to figure out, how do we do this? How do we participate? Do we go, does a provider like a QTS or some of our friends out there that also provide data center services, not just to hyperscale, but also to enterprise, do you create a industrial park? Do you create places where this can be deployed? And that seems to me as attractive as anything, is that it's beyond just these 2 or 3 very specific loads and maybe a handful of customers. There is a lot of conversation, and I'm sure you're connected to it even more than I am, where people are like, let's figure this out. States are, how do we figure this out?
Yeah, you're spot on, and throw into the mix, because you're right. The Crane Clean Energy Center, the 3 Mile Island plant. Meta did a deal with Constellation as well at the Clinton Power Station in Illinois. That part of that deal is going to uprate that plant, but that was also done under a PPA that with Meta. You're exactly right that I'd say the hyperscalers are out in front looking at the opportunities for the existing power plants. How can we, kind of get into, turn back on a plant that had shut down and is still in a state where it could be turned back on? Or how can we otherwise do a partnership with a nuclear energy owner and operator, to get some clean, firm power. I would say that the rest of the data center industry, generally speaking, the rest of the data center industry, they're interested in all of those, I'll say, small modular reactor technologies, the micro reactors. And it's not to say the hyperscalers don't have interest there as well, because they do. But the rest of the industry seems to say, okay, maybe there's an opportunity for me to bring my own power. You mentioned behind the meter deployments, maybe, and this is something that at Idaho National Laboratory and across some of the other national laboratories, we're looking at those various deployment cases, co-locating a data center with a small modular reactor or a micro reactor. We're looking at opening, and in fact, the Department of Energy is right now in the middle of putting some solicitations out on the street to invite data center developers to build data centers on federal lands co-located with an energy producing asset, nominally nuclear, geothermal, in various ways that the DOE is approaching this. And so I think there are these deployment scenarios. I'm kind of agnostic on what's good or what's not. I'm just telling you, I'm having a lot of different conversations about deployment scenarios. Could I build the data center, put the reactor, right there next to it, and just be off the grid? Yeah, I think so. And we need to do some research to kind of prove the principle, because we haven't done that yet. But it's an exciting time to be looking at that.
How is, in the past, it seemed like, again, not an expert, just anecdotal information. And my question has nothing to do with the current or the recent administrations. I'm just talking about, I've been paying attention one way or the other for the last 40-something years to different administrations, whether that's the federal or different governorships, and there hasn't seemed to be a lot of unified, kind of like where we started off our conversation. Let's go nuclear. Let's go do this. At best, it felt like it was, I don't know, it was guarded. At worst, it was oppositional. What is the federal government, bipartisan, whatever? What does that world look like now? What are they doing to facilitate, to engage, both with the industry, the nuclear power industry, but also then to help be a bridge or facilitate conversations, not just with data centers, but just industry that can draw from this kind of power?
Yeah. Yeah, that you mentioned, you used a great keyword there, bipartisan. From where the federal government sits, and for all the things the federal government does to assist in the development, deployment of, I'll say, various energy technologies, but including nuclear. It's funny, and for a moment I'll go back to the stalemate. There was a time during my, kind of formative years coming up in defense nuclear, where I looked at my commercial nuclear colleagues, and there's something of a firewall, call it, between defense nuclear and commercial nuclear. Defense nuclear, those things I talked about, submarines, aircraft carriers, nuclear weapons, our non-proliferate defense, nuclear non-proliferation activities. Those are all on that side of the firewall. Commercial nuclear on the other side. And I used to look at the other side of the firewall and say, hey, look at them. Yeah, there are operating reactors, but all this talk of SMRs, which there's talk of SMRs for decades, it's not going anywhere. But we in the defense nuclear and the nuclear Navy, we're designing a new reactor for our ballistic missile submarines to replace the Ohio class submarines. We're designing new reactors to go on to the new Ford class aircraft carriers to replace the retiring Nimitz class carriers. We're recapitalizing the entire nuclear deterrent, both the delivery systems and the warheads themselves. Like, exciting times in terms of nuclear, and sitting on the defense nuclear side. The commercial nuclear side, to me, looked like they were continuing to just do kind of experiments at laboratories, and nothing was ever really being produced that was commercially viable.
Is your badge going to work in Idaho Falls?
I'm glad you said it. Yeah. What I'm saying is a little bit provocative, certainly for those on this side of the fence. But I penned an article that has not gone anywhere but my computer. But it was sort of cathartic for me to write this, this was only a few months ago. But I wrote it because I was kind of coming to terms with the realization that indeed my commercial nuclear brethren and all that great work going on across the national laboratories, they were kind of honing the steel. These SMRs we're talking about today, it's not like we just thought them up in the last couple of years. I mean,
right.
This is technology that we've been refining for a long, long time. But they were doing great work and needed a certain type of market catalyst to come along to get past what we've talked about as that stalemate. Small modular reactors offer sort of that factory fabrication approach rather than building this huge construction project. And any construction project in the United States, nuclear or otherwise, tends to go over budget and take longer than planned. Right. And so small modular, put it in a factory, kind of build them like we build our submarine and aircraft carrier reactors in Lynchburg, Virginia. We assemble most of those in a factory and then ship them out to the shipyard to be put on the ship. Let's do that with small modular reactors. Right. And so we've been refining that technology for a long time. The market catalyst that has come along is AI. These massive energy demands, those load growth profiles, we're all familiar with that hockey stick and the load growth profiles. That provided the market catalyst to be having these conversations, these real conversations about real deployments. And I'll tell you that to throw utilities into the mix, certainly the utilities are interested, but our first of a kind advanced reactors, they're going to exist at a kind of a higher part of the cost curve. If you think of any complex endeavor, that there tends to be a cost and schedule curve. As you do more of it, it gets cheaper and it gets done quicker. That exists with nuclear, and the factory, the modularity of these reactors, being able to factory assemble them, deliver them on site, that offers a great opportunity to ride down that cost and schedule curve fairly quickly, so that those first movers help us ride down the cost curve. Those fast followers can capitalize on that by purchasing these nuclear technologies at a lower cost that works for their economic models.
When you think about the government, and I'm presuming bipartisan team that's out there, how are they engaging with industry? Are they leveraging the resources? You've talked about INL a number of times about its role, but in addition to that, that's been there for a while, honing, if they say iron sharpening iron, the ideas and the things. When I think of this, I think of, I'm going to get the R word out there, regulation. So there's that needs to come under review, and it may remain the same. Like it may be like, nope, this looks great. But anything that's been written over decades probably needs to be we do it for our roads. Like, how do we paint our roads? How do we do traffic lights? And we adjust on occasion to fit some less, some loosening, some tightening. It needs to be to purpose. But the other thing that seems interesting to me, and maybe you could speak to this, is they're looking around. Is this energy sovereignty thing? It's not a data center thing. It's an energy sovereignty thing. How do we, if we want to reshore stuff, if we want to facilitate data centers, if we want to be competitive, how do we help with land? How do we help with training? How do we help with, can you talk a little bit about some of the things that the government is doing in addition to the national labs to facilitate the opportunity that we have in front of us?
Yeah, and thanks for recentering us back on the industry engagement. You brought that up in your question, and I inadvertently did not address that piece.
So we're excited. This is exciting stuff. It's okay.
Right. Yeah, you got it, and lots to cover. And I had started talking about the bipartisan nature of this. So if you kind of start, and as someone who's worked in both the executive and legislative branches, I tend to think first about those Article 1 powers, right? The power of the purse that the Congress has. And so if you start there from where kind of policy and dollars originate, there is bipartisan support for nuclear and sort of all of the wind in the sails for the way that the legislative agenda can push things forward. Everything is well lined up in Congress. There's great bipartisan support to go deploy advanced nuclear technologies and essentially to give the administration all the tools that it needs to go enact that agenda. And both the previous the Biden administration and the current Trump administration have sought all of those tools, everything that they can do to go engage with industry and make deployments a reality. Again, just for a quick check on where things sit on the calendar, ChatGPT came out in November of 2022. Right. And so to the extent that if you kind of buy into my thesis that the AI discussion is really what provided this market catalyst for the deployment of advanced nuclear technologies, that mile marker only it came about in November of 2022. Right. So the Biden administration was in office and those load growth profiles shot up. And there was this realization that we really needed to get at this. That has carried over in the Trump administration, and we could talk some more about specific things that they've done. But the ongoing activities remain. So there are public-private partnerships that the Department of Energy has, as authorized and funded by Congress. One key one is called the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, or ARDP. That's easy to look up details. You can Google DOE and ARDP. That's a grouping of 10 companies that won through a solicitation process, won awards to get into cost sharing agreements, to whether to refine their designs, reduce risk, technical and regulatory risk in their designs, whatever the particular partnership looks like. There's federal dollars at play and private dollars at play to go off and make a deployment a reality. There is funding on the street, part of, and we can talk more about kind of where some challenges lie, but I would submit to you one key challenge is enriched uranium, the stuff that these advanced reactors need to operate, whether low enriched uranium, LEU, or as we call it, high assay low enriched uranium, or HALEU. That's just a higher concentration of uranium-235. The good stuff, so to speak, is what you get in HALEU. Either way, these advanced reactors are going to need enriched uranium, and we don't produce all that much of that domestically in the U.S. We're getting at that, and the Department of Energy has, in fact, billions of dollars. The Congress has appropriated upwards of almost $3.5 billion to go get at various aspects of the fuel cycle, and stand up a domestic enrichment capacity in the U.S. Last year, in 2024, Congress passed legislation directing essentially a reformation of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The legislation is called the ADVANCE Act, and the ADVANCE Act directed a number of things that the NRC needs to do to evolve. And I would tell you, the NRC has known that they need to evolve. I think the NRC has been working to evolve. But when I say evolve, that's just a matter of, the NRC has regulated light water reactors, reactors that are cooled by standard water. They've regulated light water reactors for their existence. That's what the NRC does. Those are the reactors we had operating in the U.S. With these advanced reactors and different types of coolants other than water, there's a regulatory environment that kind of has to be created around those. The NRC has known it, but the ADVANCE Act kind of puts their feet to the fire. And recent executive actions during this Trump administration has kind of pushed that even further to get the NRC to evolve and evolve quickly, with safety remaining paramount. Bringing the regulator along on this ride is an important component of it. So, and then you said, things beyond the labs, but just for a moment to bring it back to the laboratories, because these, the national labs, they're owned by the Department of Energy. So, we perform work that the Department of Energy approves, and its work aligned with the agenda of the administration. So we've got test beds at Idaho National Laboratory through which we can put reactor experiments. These reactor vendors can come in and turn on their reactor for the first time and get some really valuable test data. Westinghouse and a company called Radiant are putting their reactors through one of those test beds in Idaho over the next couple of years. And then we have ongoing research and development programs across the National Laboratory Network to refine those technologies. So, with that bipartisan support that starts at Congress and an agenda that is really being pushed by, frankly, everybody who believes in energy sovereignty, as you put it so well, it's all hands on deck to do everything we can to deploy advanced nuclear technologies as quickly as possible.
That's a great callback to the Biden administration. Our founder was invited with Jensen from NVIDIA and some others and sat in some DOE meetings, found it very cordial, very collaborative. Just a side note, I just find it cool when away from whatever the national media rhetoric trying, and I'm not going to pick on them doing their job, but when you find our lawmakers working with each other like that was the impression I got. And then also in the Trump administration, one of our CEOs, Tad Greason, was up a few weeks ago in Pennsylvania with President Trump. He was at that event listening. The next tier down is actually cooperating and working together. So sometimes, it's bruising. It's a full contact sport. I want them to be safe. Like, don't just say, well, let's just rip out pages 7 through 60 and no. Evaluate it. But that there's enthusiasm and cooperation. It's not as sexy to talk about as the disagreements, but it's encouraging because it's my kids and it's my grandkids and it's my neighbors and it's the people we have potluck with and the people we cancel each other's votes and the people that we sing and laugh with and help each other mow lawns when we don't feel good. That's what we want. And when we get little glimpses of it, working well for something so important, I dig it. So there's my little PA, but I dig it when it happens. And I dig it that at least on occasion, you've seen that happen across multiple groups of people. That's encouraging.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Certainly for someone like me who's worked in, as I mentioned, both executive and legislative branches, working on nuclear issues, working on defense nuclear issues, it's highly bipartisan as well. I would tell you it's that, most lawmakers tend to agree that a strong nuclear Navy is important, that a strong nuclear deterrent is important. And so even though, when I worked on the House Appropriations Committee, I was on the Democratic staff. There's Democratic and Republican staff, professional staff across all the committees. I happen to be on Democratic staff, but those issues that I worked on, for the most part, they were highly bipartisan, whether defense nuclear or commercial nuclear. And it's rare to find yourself in Washington, D.C. working on a highly bipartisan issue. But yeah, as Americans, I think we all look at the energy grid and its security is critically important, and adding to it is truly a national security imperative. But it also matters to every American who flips a switch at home or plugs in an appliance at home, right?
Yeah.
Energy security matters. And so, for a number of reasons, nuclear is seen as a solution to just a number of different equities that are shared across both sides of the aisle.
So what are the big obstacles that still exist? So we're having this, we've showed up at the Renaissance Fair, we bought our turkey leg. I got my cardboard sword. It's the only kind of sword I could do because I don't want to hurt myself or anybody else. I'd be an enthusiastic, but a horrible pilot or pirate. Nobody would walk the plank. They might have to sit in the lazy boy chair and get a very bad sunburn. And the rocking of the motion, I might not give them Dramamine on our crazy cardboard boat. But what are the obstacles that still exist that are slowing down? I don't know if it's preventing, but slowing down. What's the noise in the system from a widespread adoption and deployment? Micro, SMR, traditional, what do you think those are that really need our attention?
Yeah. So I'll offer three just to kind of set the stage. I think they're the biggest ones, but then I might want to use that as sort of context to talk about what I don't see as the biggest obstacles, because we often get into these types of conversations. The top three I look at, I already mentioned fuel availability. The last thing I want to see is a lot of great looking cars in the parking lot, it's called the reactors, and no gas in the tank, right? A great looking car really doesn't mean much if there's not gas in the tank. And so standing up the fuel cycle in this country, and by that I mean everything that it takes to get the uranium out of the earth, and we rely on like-minded partners for uranium uranium ore, and that's okay. Maybe that piece of it doesn't concern me as much, but everything we do to turn that raw uranium into usable enriched fuel for a reactor, it's the rest of that process that we need to stand up in this country. We let that muscle sort of atrophy decades ago, and we need to stand that back up. And that's not going to be cheap, and frankly, it's not going to be easy. But I already mentioned the funding that Congress has allocated to that effort, and there's some really smart people at the Department of Energy and throughout the administration working on getting that money out the door and to the right places, the right companies to stand that up. So that's important, and I think we're getting at it. The other two are workforce and supply chain. On the workforce side, I would submit to you, it is so similar in many ways to many other industries, and I think the data center industry is looking at that same challenge with construction plans across this country that are unprecedented. I think in your industry, we look at widespread deployments of advanced nuclear reactors, and we think we're going to need the people to go make this happen. These things don't deploy themselves; they don't build themselves. Right. You could design one with a fairly small team. You could probably even demonstrate it with a fairly small team. But you want to talk about thousands of deployments, that's going to take people. That's going to take hands getting dirty. And we need those people in this country to do that. So in some ways, I'm heartened by all of the other the awareness across other industries on that challenge, because we can kind of all ride together to help promote those programs, the trades programs, apprenticeships, all of those types of worker training programs that can help get at this. In some ways, we have some nuclear specific considerations, and we need to continue to churn out nuclear engineers, and other scientists and engineers that are from our universities. But we need those trades to get out there and force and do this. The other one being supply chain. That also, by and large, I would put us in with other industries that are facing some supply chain challenges. And I would say, okay, our supply chain needs some of them are unique to nuclear, but we, like many other industries, are going to face some of these same knot holes that we've got to get through. So choke points, single points of failure. We need to make sure we're cognizant of that. I would tell you, just by way of example, in the nuclear Navy, that has been something that we've thought about for decades. And certainly as our commercial nuclear industry sort of atrophied and we weren't really building nuclear reactors in this country, the nuclear reactors we were building were for our submarines and aircraft carriers, and that vendor base has been critically important to the nuclear Navy, and the Navy watches that very, very closely. They monitor that very closely. I think we're going to need to put those kinds of eyes on the commercial nuclear supply chain. But again, I recognize that a lot of industries are wrestling with that. So if I offer those three as kind of the fuel availability, the supply chain, the workforce piece, for a moment, let me turn to what I don't think the biggest obstacle is, and that's the regulatory piece. I get that a lot, and even if I just offer the question out to a crowd of folks, what do you think is going to get in the way of our biggest aspirations for nuclear?
Yeah.
Very often people say, it's the NRC. And so I go back to what I mentioned before, the Advance Act last year sort of put the feet to the fire on a lot of things the NRC kind of knew that they needed to get at. But I think there's value in putting their feet to the fire. On May 23rd, the president signed 4 nuclear executive orders, and we can talk more about that. But I think we've hit on a lot of the priorities set in those executive orders just through our conversation. But one of those executive orders also further put the feet to the fire for the NRC to reform, and I think that's important. So in the NRC, there are wins already through the regulatory process for advanced reactors, construction permits that have been approved by the NRC for advanced reactor construction. NuScale has a design certification for their SMR with other designs, the applications being docketed by the NRC. There's been just fantastic engagement between advanced developers and the NRC. I would tell you there's not that many advanced reactor developers that I have private conversations with who tell me, we just can't get through the NRC. They're engaged, they're constructively engaged, and the NRC is being responsive because everybody knows the light is shining on the NRC. So if you ask me, is it fuel availability of the NRC? I'd say it's fuel availability. We got to get at that. The NRC is coming along and doing what they need to do. So I just would submit that piece to you.
It sounds almost like, as a senior citizen myself, when I sit in front of my doctor of 14 years and I'm NERC in this analogy, and she comes like, look, here's 20-year-old you jumping out of airplanes. You can eat what you want. You could do what your regulatory, your diet system, whatever, look like this. Now here's you 40 years removed from that. It doesn't work anymore. You need to follow this. And so while she's holding my feet to the fire, to use your analogy, she's for me. She's not against me. She is 100% for me. But to be healthy, we have to review my supply chain. We have to review how I'm fueling myself. We have to review because of the circumstances have changed, not just with my age, but in the things around me and what's available to accelerate things, or now we know more about my personal genetics or whatever it is. So we can with a lot more clarity get a purpose, and maybe it's the same thing, very rare, but I suppose on occasion somebody goes into their doctor for their physical, they say, crushing it. Look at you, 25-year-old. Not many, but a few. Push back here. Mine doesn't even want me to go. Evidently, I can't say the word buffet anymore. I don't know what's up with that. But anyway, but I think when it's done with that in mind, and that's what I keep hearing on the broad, is look, we also agree if we can have energy within our borders, or at least within our continent, that's what we'd like to do. It just solves a whole bunch of other challenges if we can do that. And then we use it internally this way. Like, why wouldn't we want to do that? So for all of those reasons, that's been my from a distance understanding. Where I've heard it interesting, it reminds me in the data center world. So in order to have data center, you have to have what we've been talking about today all day: power. It has to be affordable, has to be local, has to be safe. Power. And then I need, it has to be secure, because we think that data, ideas of the whole world live in there. Mm-hmm. Whoever's data center it is, a federal data center for secrets, Stranger Things, you're watching it out your soccer field, whatever it is. It's the ideas of the whole world are in there, but then it has to be connected with fiber. And there's been a lot of work in metropolitan areas where they're building out strong fiber. And some are still, and there's been work going across the oceans with fiber, but in this, what we call the middle mile, the conduits that would run from an Atlanta to Louisville or Cincinnati, or from Delaware over to, well, they would never go from Delaware to, I guess, Pittsburgh. Those are arch enemies. But, these middle locations, those conduits are full. And so now they have to go back to regulation, not about the fiber, not about the data center, but for the right of way to get what they would call empowered transmission. And so that's this attractiveness to how close can I get the transmission to the data center, not just for loss, not just for those other things, but because the difficulty the irony to your point may end up being that NERC gets out of the way. And they, that's all like ridiculously facilitated, safer than it's ever been, because it's also using AI to help validate the proofs things are coming out of a factory, all of those things. And we're still in a queue because to set up modern transmission any length, especially if you're crossing states, but any length of distance, that might be the challenge for all of us. And so it's a complex machine, or as complex as my friends would say, system of systems to get all of this done. And if we're not careful, we only focus on this one thing that, it's got the big letter N in front of it, and we're all fascinated with that. And this unsexy thing over here could be this sticky widget. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, it does. In fact, and I think you hit the nail on the head in one of your comments at the top of this entire conversation, where you talked about getting all the right people in the room to work on a thing, right? And I think that's what's important. And frankly, that's been on my mind for the last couple of years as we talk about advanced nuclear deployments. If you buy into, again, my thesis that a lot of this work on small modular reactors was kind of occurring on the back burner, and certainly in a lot of people's minds, maybe as lab experiments, the nuclear folks were just talking to one another. Now that we're on the threshold of widespread advanced nuclear deployments, we've got to be in a conversation in a room with a lot of other people to talk about what does it mean to actually deploy a reactor, putting electrons, say, on the grid or through some sort of islanded concept with a microgrid. Who are all of the entities that need to be in the room and present and engaged to actually map out that strategy? We've got to be having those conversations. It's part of why I love being here and having this conversation with you. Just, if nothing else, these are two industries that can get together and talk about what are we working on and what do we need from one another to make this a reality.
Doggone it, you're stealing my thunder. So here, well, I'm going to reciprocate. I've had so much fun getting to talk to people from the INL in particular over the years, because there is a heart for a couple things in my experience. One, how do I, like, you guys have been very persistent, you, Christine King, others. How do I start? And we're not even sure exactly. It's like we're from different cultures trying to figure out how we hold each other to dance. Like, we're really not sure. I don't want to offend. I don't want to hurt. And I want to be able to sway and move. How do we do? And so it's a thing. And we'll use similar terms, but they mean a little bit. Like when we say uptime and we're talking to certain people in the energy business, they're like, oh, you need 5 nines. Sure, I'll get you all but that 10 hours or 20. No, you don't understand. This building can never go down. 5 nines is a mechanism in a contract. It can never, hey, Sheriff's 911 system, hold your breath for about 10 minutes while we do maintenance. It can never go down. So as we're learning to do this, you guys have been so great, in my personal experience, at inviting data center people. Because one of the things for us that can be a challenge, we're looking at 18 to 36 month construction cycle and get this facility commissioned and energized. I know it's going to last hopefully for dozens and dozens, maybe even hundreds of years. Like some of our facilities have been converted because they're old, their original big Sears or, they're what they call 200-year buildings. But what's attractive for us is the energy sources that are available right now or in the next 24 to 36 months, not experiments, not standing up the factories. Like the grid is our go-to. That's what we want, whatever's supplying it. And if that's not available and we start talking about any of these other forward-thinking things, well, how do we do that? And nuclear, even in the best estimates, is still a ways away. Not decades, but a ways. 4, 6, 12. I've heard a range of years from the CEOs at different SMRs and micro companies and government officials. But where you guys have been so persistent is saying, hey, come and sit, hear what we're talking about. And on occasion, 1, you'll get to understand us, but 2, we'll get to understand you, and you'll get to be able to insert an idea. We know there's probably not a business here for 3 to 4 years or whatever it is. I don't know, but it's not today. We got it and you got it, but it will be at some point, and then it will probably be the dominant. And wouldn't you like while we still have so much ability to change the mold and to sketch stuff out, to have your voice heard, what's easy, what's hard. And you guys have done that in such a way, like leaders in my organization that are so busy, they can't hardly keep up with their own schedules, make themselves available to come. They definitely want to hear the opportunities are. You've been good at and persistent at reaching out and doing stuff like that, not just for us, but for the industry. And I think that's what it's going to take, is to engage. You show up at these events, but beyond that, you communicate. Anyway, I'm going on and on. I don't mean to belabor this, but I just think that is a way for these really big, important, vital industries to find a way to move together, to use your word, elegantly in the future when it's time to move from practice into the performance. It's a great way. It's a great initiative that I see developing in front of me, and I really appreciate you guys doing it.
As part of this conversation, and perhaps as kind of a bookend on many of the things that I've said here today, I think it's important for everybody in the mix, for folks to remember nuclear is hard, and going down this path that I've described, this for these widespread deployments, this is going to take a lot of effort, and we're going to learn a lot along the way. But I never want anyone to walk away from any of my discussions or talks and say, yeah, I don't know, that guy Brian really has a rosy view of nuclear, and I think it's going to be a lot harder than that. Coming from the nuclear Navy, I'm naturally a skeptic. I assume that things are not going to go to plan. And I think with everything that we've talked about, I think that's a fair assumption. What's important is that we learn from any mistakes that we make along the way, integrate lessons learned into our budget projections and our schedule projections, so that we can be upfront with our customers, our nuclear vendor partners. Those private companies can be upfront with their customers, and we can deliver on the promises that are made. I think that's just going to be very, very important as part of this deployment model. Nuclear is hard. Admiral Rickover, who started the nuclear Navy, that was a mantra of his. None of this is easy. Nuclear reactors, the real ones, not the paper ones, but the real ones, they're heavy, they're expensive, they take a long time to build. This is hard. So while I don't think the technology is an obstacle, we know how to split the atom, we know how to move heat from the reaction. That's fairly simple. But getting this stuff deployed, making all of this a reality, this is going to be a challenge, but it's an exciting challenge, and it's important for all the reasons that you said so well.
I think why we're attracted to it in the data center industry, my co-CEO says this all the time. He's said it for years, and I love it. He's like, look, we do hard things.
Yeah.
If you're not in the business of doing hard things, you probably should not be in the data center business. On top of that, he said, but what we're endeavoring to do, because if it was easy, the hyperscales or whoever just go do it themselves. So we embrace the suck. But the second part of that is, he said, look, so do your best to have a good day. Not all days are going to be good days. because we do hard things. But if you do them, good days add up. And it's just, I believe he heard that from, I think it's the Duke female basketball team, but wherever he got it from, it was good days add up. So let's endeavor to have a good day doing hard things and let those days add up. And you find if your footsteps are doing that, even if they're more shuffle and stumble than striding on occasion, because they're hard things, it'll get you to a destination that you want to get to. And what I love about this conversation, what data centers represent and energy sovereignty represents freedom and independence and the opportunity to have the kinds of conversations we want to have as Americans and give us the best opportunity. And so it's a purpose and a thing bigger than our walls and electrons and molecules. Yeah. And it's cool that we're doing it. And I appreciate you coming on today. And I appreciate when you show up to audiences. We're getting more sophisticated, but we're like, what? He's looking too sharp to come from turn off the lights. Is he glowing? Like, we're a little skeptical ourselves. Ryan, thanks for coming on today. What haven't we talked about that maybe we should have?
I think we hit all the points, and I appreciate you sweeping it up like that. But I think the biggest thing that I wanted to make sure to fit in was just that notion that none of this is easy. But man, do I love what you said about that. It's not easy, but that's what makes it fun. So let's go do this thing, and let's do something that matters to this country, and let's get a lot of smart people in the room and figure out how to make it happen. So I thank you for saying that. I think it was well said.
My great pleasure. Well, thanks for coming on the show today. We appreciate it. And hey, if you appreciate it, hit the like button. And if you loved it, hit the subscribe button. We'll see you next time, everybody. Have a good one.